All right. And run that up there. And so here, it's 125, LEC 19. Okay. And I think we're up to chapter 6. Let me take a look at my schedule. We're a bit ahead of things, which is not the end of the world. I'm not sure what we're going to do on the last day. I think we're likely, yeah, we're up to 6. We'll probably finish 6, 7, and 8 today. We'll see.
Tomorrow we just end at 12.
We end at 12 anyway, but I thought there'd be something left. We may be done with everything, but that's a good problem to have. So, all right. So I don't care about your stinking update. Here we are. So 6. All right. So assessment and testing. You need to see how things work. So of course, we know there's penetration testing, where you pay a professional to break into your network under controlled conditions, and that helps you find vulnerabilities. And of course, the original pen test, just break in. Now, your pen test should come with a recommendation to improve security. So it's really includes a sort of security audit as well. The main difference being a security audit typically just compares you to a compliance framework to see if you have these 100 things, whereas a pen test finds a vulnerability and then goes deeply into your network to like prove that they got in. And they're not necessarily as thorough at scanning a lot of things on the side. But any pen test report should include a recommendation of how to fix this problem. Everyone expects that now. Social engineering is, of course, the most powerful technique. It always has been. Humans are the weak link. No matter how good your technology is, you can just talk humans into doing foolish things. And this is essentially impossible to patch, because even if you could, you would then have a bunch of psychopaths. Humans have a natural desire to help people and to submit to authority and to have a certain social status and to have friendship. And so these are properties that can be exploited by people that trick you into thinking you can trust them when you can't. So it's a big issue. And this used to be laughed at by technical people who said, oh, that doesn't matter. And that ship has sailed. Everybody now agrees that this is a huge problem at your company and it should be part of a pen test. And but I heard people that tell me they go to a company every year, they pen test, and they say, oh, don't do any phishing because we know we're vulnerable to that. And that's too easy. And he said, but are you going to fix it? And he said, no. Well, then why do you even bother with this other stuff? You have a huge problem. By the way, that's almost always how you get in with phishing. That's how APT10 gets in. That's how a pen test getting. You send emails to people. Somebody will click on that link. And I mean, that, by the way, I mentioned they hacked RSA, Chinese hacked RSA. They sent them an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF file, and their antivirus detected it and threw it in a trash can, and somebody took it out of the trash can and opened it. So you just have to have a good enough story, and people will override the security controls. So that's why it's all up to your ingenuity in creating a situation that makes them want to open it so much that they will override the security boundaries to get there.
They also they would drop the USBs and people would pick them up because they were freebies.
Yeah.
They had certain virus and they were hacked in and they became
Yeah.
blocked.
That was Buckshot Yankee when they did that to us. And yeah, that's right. And that's why the military put glue to block the USB sticks for a while. Yep. That's another good one. So anyway, the pen test, there's more and more science and organization to how you do a pen test. So there's tools that are commonly used, like vulnerability scanners like Nessus and Metasploit and Core Impact and Canvas and Accunetrics, Hailstorm Scanner, and so on. And now there's these steps. You do a planning and reconnaissance, just like software development. Amateur software developers start coding right away. Experts spend 80% of their time planning before they write any code, because you will have to throw away everything you write the first day, because it'll turn out you're on the wrong track. And the same thing's true of a pen test. If you're not an amateur, you spend most of your time investigating the situation and the company and finding out what's going on before you waste your time breaking in. Then eventually you scan on things, find out what servers are available, what ports are listening, what versions of things are running, find vulnerable things, exploit it, and then pivot and wander through the network and exploit more and more things until you achieve your goal, which is usually become the domain administrator, but it could be something else. And then you write a report, and then you present the report to management. So management skills, proper dress, politeness, social skills are really important. And professional pen test groups that I know of typically have a bunch of scary, crazy, offensive hackers, and they have one guy who's like the PR on a team up. I have a guy I work with closely now who was from corporate management, and he was horrified when he found my competition team, so the hacking competition. He said, these people showed up late. They don't act right. They're like breaking the rules. These are awful. We need to kick them off. I said, no, that's what you get when you get real hackers. He said, now that I think about it, when we hired the pen testers, I only ever saw this one guy. I never met the rest of them. And I said, yeah, that's what you do. You have one guy who can wear a suit and be polite, and you have a bunch of scary drunks behind him actually doing the work. That's how it works. If you go to DEF CON, people are horrified by DEF CON. DEF CON is just howling madness. People are breaking the law. People are, and the difference between DEF CON and like RSA. RSA is like the people wearing suits that have money, and DEF CON is the real hackers. And there's a huge culture difference. Anyway, and that's why you need CISSPs. Really, are supposed to be the people in the middle negotiating that huge culture gap. So, all right. So pen testers, of course, sign non-disclosure agreements, and when they find secrets, they don't expose them. Otherwise, they're criminals. So just like a doctor or a lawyer, you end up knowing secrets of the company, and you have an obligation to conceal them. That's why, that's what happened. Snowden leaked all that stuff, and that's why, he went it to Russia. His lawyer, they interviewed his lawyer in America, and he said, my advice to Edward Snowden is marry Anu Kournikova and stay in Russia forever. Never come back. Because I don't want the job of saving you if you come back here. You totally promised not to leak the secrets, and you totally leaked the secrets. I don't know how I'm going to save you. It reminds me, I went to the Secret Service meeting, High-Tech Crime Investigators Association, and they had a defense attorney there. They're usually barred, but they had one. This guy said, well, clients will call me. They'll say, the car gets pulled over, the cop comes up, can I search you? He asked, do you have guns or drugs in the car? And they do have those things in the car. And they say, no. And he said, well, can I search the car? And they say, yes. So they search the car. Then they call me, and I'm like, you said yes? Now what am I supposed to do? What do you think I'm going to do now? I mean, this is like when Trump was being threatened with impeachment in the early days of the Mueller report, the main constitutional lawyer said, I'm not working for him because I know this guy. He won't shut up and let me do the talking. He won't stop tweeting. He won't take my advice, and he won't pay the bill. So I'm not working for this guy. I mean, I'm a good lawyer, but I can't save a client like that. Anyway, so vuln testing is where you run a vulnerability scanner typically and find all the vulnerable services. This is what vulnerability scanners, Nessus is the free one that's most popular, but there's a lot of others. And these, now vuln scanners often have false positives. They will tell you there's 10 vulnerabilities when in fact, most of them don't matter. Any of them aren't even real. What it means is it sent some kind of traffic to the server and it got something back that didn't look right. But usually it's not really vulnerable. And very often, even if it is vulnerable, there's some other layer of defense that stops it from really getting to an important business process. So there are pen testers. There's a guy that came and took my beginning pen testing course, and he said, I'm out in the business doing professional pen tests. And I said, why are you taking this course? He said, well, I print out the report and hand it to the client, and then they ask me what it means, and I don't know. So I said, he said, I figured I better take a course. And so I thought of yelling at him, wait a minute, you're charging money for a service like that? And I said, but on the other hand, here he is doing the right thing. Now's not the time to yell at him. But you have to go through that report and verify it manually and figure out what it means. That's why they pay you. They could run the tool, but what they need is a knowledgeable human giving them a reasonable estimate of what it means, like a doctor. You can look at the x-ray. The doctor has to tell you, what does this mean? What should I do? What part of this is okay, and what part of this is the real problem I need to fix? That requires human judgment, and it requires understanding something about the business. What part of this is really going to cost you money, and what part of this is okay to put off till later? And amateurs always focus on the one part they understand and yell and wonder why management won't focus on this thing they think is so important. And usually that's because it's really not all that important. Anyway, so a security audit, like I say, is testing you against a standard like a compliance audit, PCI DSS, or any of the others, HIPAA. A security assessment will go through your whole company to find all your problems, policies and procedures, physical door locks, fire suppression, many, many things, not just the electronic security. Yeah. Well, this is what the CISA is. We went through the very first day of my life, Zochman framework and COBIT and ISO 27000. That's what these all are. Those long pages of all these tests you have to do. Well, I don't think any of them have got it as simple as a form. It is like the NIST series. It's like 100 PDFs that are 10 pages each. It's like your tax or your HR laws. It's big and horrible. It would be nice if it was just 1 or 2 pages of checkboxes. There are a few of those, like recommendations, like top 10s from individual groups like ISACA and OWASP. They have some of that, but even them, that's really just the top ones that are like top 10 or 20. There's like the 20 essential security controls. You could start there. We had that one go by in an earlier section. They're the top 5 controls which stop like 90% of vulnerabilities. I don't know if I can find it right away, but that's the closest thing I know to a simple checkbox. Top 20 essential security controls or something. I wonder if I got the, yes, good, the CISSP, there you are. Here's the closest thing I know to like a non-mind-boggling list is the CIS security controls. They have the top 20, but this is not the same as a compliance with any framework. Every framework is much, much bigger.
No, I was just looking for something to give students.
Yeah, this is,
The 100-page PDF is
yeah, this is a good way to start. This is, you definitely need to know this. This is like, you know, in Net Plus, they need to know like the top 20 ports. And there's a lot of others, but they certainly need to know that. This is a good place to start. Yeah, and another place to go is the OAuth top 10. Those are simple ones for like students. But real compliance is much more than this. But certainly, any security professional should be familiar with the contents of these 2 lists. They might not memorize exactly what list it's on or anything, but all this should be common knowledge. That you know that you have to inventory all your devices, you have to have secure configurations and configuration management for your routers and switches and firewalls, vulnerability assessment, and limit least privilege. So not everybody's logged in as administrator. That's why these should be familiar controls for people. Audit logs, email, web browser limitations, malware defenses, you know, these are really nothing more than the common sense security measures. And so it definitely would be good to tell students, let me add these to the end of the page in case anybody wants these links. I'll put them at the bottom of the CISSP page, which is 125. Okay, top 20. And here's the OAuth top 10. We have mentioned them before, but anyway, this might put them in one place where they're easy to find there. And so if you go to this page, the CISSP, and just go to the bottom, they should be there. Yep, there's the top 20 and the top 10. So that would be like an exam cheat sheet kind of summary. Good. All right. And then, of course, you got internal audits where you have your own team looking for your own problems, which is a good thing to do, but it's never as good as an external audit because your own staff, generally the person who has created the problem is not qualified to find the problem. Of course, they have something they don't know, which is why they did it wrong, and they don't know enough to look for it either, obviously. So you do what you can internally, and the external audits often find defects that you didn't find internally. That's the whole point of it. So log reviews are very important. As a matter of fact, that's what I was thinking. If we finish everything today, what I think I'd like to do on the last day is Splunk. I have a Splunk capture the flag where you learn how to use Splunk, and Splunk is a very good thing to know. And by the way, there's a very good certification that students can get very easily that will get you a job as Splunk. Splunk is the main SIEM tool for log analysis, and have a really fun capture the flag type thing. So I think we'll do that the last day. That's my current plan. It's all ready to go. And if you will not be sorry you learned Splunk. It might be worth more than anything else. You can totally get the cert yourself very easily and teach it to students very easily, and they can really get a job from it. Anyway, and that's what this is.
Well too, that company.
Oh yeah, they're the top, the number 4 highest paying company in the world, in America. And the people I know that work there are so happy, and I managed to make a really fun CTF out of it. I'm very happy with it because I got a bunch of data from Splunk. So yeah, I think we'll do that. If you have enough time for that. It's not directly related to passing the CISSP exam. CISSP exam, you just need to know a little bit about SIEM in general, but learning how to use Splunk in detail is valuable, although not specifically for certification on the CISSP. But you might want to get a Splunk certificate, which is a much smaller accomplishment, but more directly valuable to you and your students right away. all your devices have logs, your antivirus, your firewalls, your switches, your servers, everything, you're running vulnerability scanners, everything is everything logs, and you have to analyze them. And so you have to gather all these logs into one place and have some kind of search tool. And the primary tool people use for that is Splunk, although there are a lot of others like Logarithm and Elk and Security Onion. There's a bunch of them, but Splunk is the king. And you have to somehow be gathering all these logs and then somehow searching through them and somehow finding bad events in those logs. So that's centralized logging. You have to somehow move it all over your network to one central server where you can search it all.
And things in plain text. Why is it not encrypted? I'm sorry.
Oh, why is it not, logs are not encrypted?
Yeah.
They usually are now. Of course, there was a time when they weren't. I think syslog wasn't at first. I think the Splunk agents all encrypted now. Of course, now everything should be encrypted. There was a time when people did not bother encrypting it. And I don't think any modern tool, any modern commercial tool would do it unencrypted anymore. Of course, you should not be sending any of this data unencrypted. This is obviously sensitive data. Yeah, in fact, this is why if you get the free version of Splunk, they punish you by having no user accounts and everybody's the administrator, because the logs often contain sensitive information like passwords and stuff. So you really don't even want to let everybody see the logs. So that's how they punish you if you get the free version. You can't use it for production because there aren't any accounts, which is very nice for training. We can really get all the features with no time limit or anything for training, and they've crippled it in a way that we can't use it for production. I think that's a pretty good deal. All right, so then you're going to test your software, of course, that you're developing. Your programmers are making errors, and your library code has errors you're inheriting from the supply chain, and you have to somehow cope with all that. So you can do static analysis on the code, or you can do manual code review. And another thing a lot of people do is pair programming, where two people work together. So hopefully one will catch the mistakes, the other doesn't. There are many systems. The static testing is when the code is not running, looking at source code for things like lint. And dynamic testing is where you run the code and watch its operation and test it there. You can make the customer requirements and make sure that it has the specific features your customer needs. You can simulate business activities to try to see how it performs in action. So you can do unit testing, where you break it up into little components and test the components one by one. There's installation testing and integration testing to make sure it interoperates with the other components. And regression testing, where you test it after updates to make sure it still has the recommended level of functionality. So you have an official list of what it should do and you make sure it still does all those things. And then acceptance testing to make sure that it meets whatever the requirements of your customers are. Fuzzing is Microsoft used to not do fuzzing up through Windows Vista, and a hacker named Laurent Gaffey found a 0 day in Windows Vista that would blue screen of death it. And he said, I hate Microsoft. They're a bunch of bums. They say write quality software. They're just lying. I hate their guts. And he published a blog and released it. And it totally would kill Vista. And so Microsoft patched it. And next week, he just found another one. And he said, what rotten bums they are. Here, I did it to him again. And Microsoft finally, and he found it by fuzzing. And fuzzing, he showed his entire fuzzer, which is one page of Python, like 30 lines. All you do is you take a normal network packet with Wireshark, and then you modify it. Flip one bit, just make one thing a little longer. You just make small modifications in a network packet and see what happens, just randomly. And he said, within 10 seconds of fuzzing, I got the blue screen of death. And Microsoft said, we don't do fuzzing because it's a random process and you never know when it's done. And that's like sloppy. We have controlled process. Run it through the scanner, run it through the scanner, check off the boxes. Now we're sure it's done. And after he humiliated them twice, they finally said, okay, we added fuzzing. And now everybody accepts that you should be fuzzing anything. Anything that takes network traffic or any kind of input, you should do fuzz testing where you modify the input. The original fuzzing was they just used old dial-up modems in a lightning storm. They would drop bits, and people noticed that it caused things to crash. And they said, I can understand how you get the wrong data, but it should not cause it to crash. And they realized this is a way to detect flaws in your code. There is some unexpected input that causes a crash, which is wrong. All your input should either be accepted or rejected, but none of it should cause a crash. If it does, then you have a bug in your code. And so this is one of the steps of vulnerability exploit development. You start with some software you want to find, you send it random input. Typically what you do is make inputs very long, but you also try unusual characters, punctuation marks, unexpected breaks. You send it junk until it crashes. And when it crashes, you found a vulnerability.
What he was doing was sending a giant on a router.
Sending what?
He was sending it an Ethernet frame.
Well, a large Ethernet frame would only matter if you're trying to fuzz the switch, because after the switch, that gets put back together. But that would be something to test. But if you're trying to test an application, then you do something like send it a really long password. This was true of Chrome. Chrome, in one of the early versions of Chrome, all you had to do was save a file, and if the file name was longer than like 4,000 characters long, it would crash. Yeah.
There was a guy who broke IIS by putting a really, really long URL and discovered that they can't handle a super long URL.
Which one?
IIS.
IS, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
The problem is fundamentally C. C is too close to assembly language, and it means programmers have to keep track manually of a bunch of risks. You have to reserve space for something, and then every time you put data in there, you're supposed to remember how big it is and make sure you're not putting in too much. That is kind of stupid. Of course, people will eventually make a mistake and put too much in there. If you use a more modern language like Java or Visual Basic, you can't do this. You reserve room for 10 spaces in Visual Basic, and then you put in 100, it will just automatically reserve a bigger space to put it in. So that doesn't happen. C doesn't do that. And so, but it's of course more fast and efficient because it doesn't waste time trying to guess what you might have done wrong like that. And anyway, that's where we are. C is responsible for most of these bugs. There are bugs of other types, but anyway, then you've got combinatorial testing and pairwise testing where you test components or 2 or 3 components in combinations to see if they're going to work. A misuse case where you try to formally model an adversary misusing it. With this threat modeling essentially. And this Microsoft has this security development lifecycle because Microsoft, it's kind of hilarious to me. I watched Microsoft go from totally ignoring security back in the days of Windows 95 and DOS to waking up around Windows 2001 with Microsoft's trustworthy computing memo from Bill Gates in 2001 or 2002 when he said, all right, I'm totally changing the priorities of our entire company to security first because this is getting out of hand. And then they added all these features to make it more and more secure and all these procedures, and they became a model of how to develop secure software. And then another company like Google comes in 10 years later and they make all the same mistakes in the same order, and Apple comes in and makes all the same mistakes in the same order. Like Google hasn't yet discovered Patch Tuesday, where you actually push patches to the Android phone. They're still working on how to do that, so people are using phones that are 2 years out of date. And Apple didn't discover that you have to update things. So they advertised, there were like 5 reasons to buy an Apple, and one of them was no malware. So they blocked a PDF reader update because they didn't want to have the box popping up irritating their users. They blocked it for like 6 weeks until it would come at the official Apple cycle, and people got a PDF virus. And so they had to take that bullet point off. They can no longer pretend there are no Mac viruses. And it's their own damn fault. It's amazing. Every company goes through the same mistakes. They pretend they have no problems. Then they pretend they really don't have to do much about the problems. Then they pretend they can lie to people and say they have no problems. And they finally admit we're the same as everybody else. We need endless chain of patches and fixes. And we need a bug reporting channel. And there's just going to be an endless series of fixes and repairs coming out. And we can't pretend that we're somehow above that. But they all have to go through a sort of humiliation to get there. Anyway, so Microsoft Security Development Lifecycle is the most mature and advanced system because they were forced earlier than other companies to admit they had a problem and cope with it. So you can try to figure out your testing strategy doesn't really hit all the code. And you can try to figure out what percentage of the code you actually have exercised. And there are fancy fuzzing platforms like Peach, I think is one of them, and there's others where you actually modify the code to make sure that you hit 100% of the code. So you run these tests. It's very easy to run a test and get an output. It is, of course, more complicated to figure out exactly what to do to fix all the problems you found. Anyway.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So whenever you write code, you know that it will always do more than what you're supposed to do. Like, for example, okay, I give you 10 things, but it will end up by default doing 12 or 15 things.
Well, you know, that's why I suppose you try to think of all the exceptions and all the edge cases and handle them. That's sort of the difference between an amateur and a professional programmer is, right? The professional actually thinks, what if this is below zero? What if this is greater than that? You know, you try to think of them all, but you're never perfect.
Yes, and then is that not tested? Because if you ever write code, you know, it does everything, but then there's this little place where this bit does a lot more than just the 10 things it does.
Well, that's exactly what this is all about. These are the general systems that are used to try to address that problem, to try to make sure you have tested it. And of course, it's all very imperfect. Yeah, that's the problem. And the most common flaw that I see being exploitable is between systems, where one system is working fine and you connect it to the next one, and the next one is working fine, but the signals sent out of here are misunderstood by the next end. That's like SQL injection. SQL injection, the SQL server is perfectly fine and the PHP server is perfectly fine, and the end result is a disaster. But neither one of them has a bug. The PHP server works fine and it sends the data it was told to send onto the next server, and the next server correctly runs the command it got, and they can both say it's somebody else's fault. You need another level of abstraction. Somebody above them needs to think about the failure of the entire system. And that's tougher. Anyway, so let's see, I should have a Kahoot, and this is probably going to say 7A. Let me see if I can figure out which Kahoots to give you. It should at least be the favorites. Okay. All right, there's only a 7. Oh, maybe that's the end of the 7, huh? Okay, good. All right. I'll bring that back in a minute. There. All right. I think 5 might be the number. All right. So, what would ensure HIPAA compliance? A compliance audit. Okay. What process runs on UDP 514? Yeah, that's syslog, centralized log. All right. What happens after you update software? It's a regression test to make sure that it still has all the working features it should have, that you didn't break anything. And what did Microsoft highlight in their STL? They did threat modeling, the stride thing. That was their big contribution at that, as far as we're talking about in this chapter anyway. PC, Robert, and Jane. Robert is 3, and Jane is 3, and PC is 3. Okay, good. All right, so that's it for 6. Let's take a look at 7. And, all right. Okay. So security operations, another kind of vague thing, kind of overlaps with the others. But anyway, then there's administrative security. These are the management activities that make you more secure. So general principles like least privilege, you don't give people more privileges than they need, separation of duties, where 2 people have to work together, so one does the work and another person approves the work before it's finalized. You rotate people from jobs. so that people don't stay in one job forever and someone else gets another look. You force people to take vacations, so they must let someone else substitute so they can see what's been happening. Non-disclosure agreements and background checks we've talked about. Privilege monitoring is an issue. You should be recording what the administrators do and reviewing it, because your administrators are, of course, if they do bad things, they can make a lot of trouble, and you have no technical controls blocking administrators from doing bad things. So you should have an administrative control where you review what administrators have been doing. That's your only real control, that they're not doing bad things.
Does HR oversee this, or will CEO say?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure who would do it. I mean, HR would be brought in if you want to fire them, but I think it would probably be like normal management supervision looking at this. I think you'd have somebody in the management team looking at what they do to see if it looks fishy. Like, are they making a lot of extra administrator accounts or something? It logically should be somebody who is responsible for setting the policies the administrator is supposed to be following.
So would a DLP be able to do all of this, or
What?
data loss prevention?
No, data loss prevention, in my experience, is just an automated process to see if your private data is leaving the network. That's not usually a concern with this. What you're concerned about here is installing unauthorized software like rootkits, using the network for other purposes, like people run porn and illegal pirate software from your company network, promoting other people to administrator that shouldn't be there, creating other accounts, creating backdoors, that kind of thing.
And endpoint protection would be more like this.
Well, endpoint protection, the administrator probably knows how to defeat the endpoint protection. That's the problem. The administrator knows how to turn all that off.
Right, so Nike does something very different. So they have all their technical people who do operations. Then they have a group of people that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
And they're a group offsite. Their job is to guard those administrators who are in charge of whatever.
Yeah.
And they're not even allowed to say they work at Nike. I've met someone at a boot camp because you have to tell where you're from. He said he was from Nike, and then they asked him what to do. Goes, you can't ask me what I do.
Yeah, this reminds me of like the police have this internal affairs. There's
Right.
people who, and they largely hated, but they have this job. This is the same kind of thing. You have some kind of internal affairs people to police your own shop, and police your administrators who expect to be all powerful. And that's exactly the problem. They think they're all powerful, so somebody has to be checking what they're doing.
Not all companies have.
No, not at all. This is
But
the,
this company doesn't have this, and it's like,
and therefore you're taking a risk. You're trusting that administrator, and if they go rogue on you, or if they even just make mistakes or have poor judgment, you're hosed. That's why this is why they say complying with one of these onerous frameworks is a step of maturity for your organization. Like I say, most companies have no disaster recovery plan, and they're fine until there's a disaster. And that's how you tell the professionals from the amateurs. The amateurs just fall down easy. The professionals have prepared for stuff and they can withstand the shocks. So, yeah.
Just a good thing. We hired a new webmaster. This is a long time ago, and he was changing stuff on the Ransack web in real time.
That's right.
It was so bad
Oh, yeah.
that nobody was watching him. And one of the professors actually said that anonymous, and they had to actually, and he said he didn't do it, and they had to capture it and then tell him, and then he got fired.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when Ransack has internal audit.
Yep.
And they're completely offside.
Yeah. And
We had issues with this guy because he did not want to get fired.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up. One of the auditors I follow on Twitter was talking about this just a couple of weeks ago. He said, I went to the company and it turned out that one of our developers never used the change management system at all. He didn't change where he was just logging into the server and changing code on a server, and there was no record kept. And I said, if the server crashes, we'll lose it. If another developer wants to change something, I said, what the hell? He said, that's too much bother. It's easier to do it this way. And I said, yeah, it's easier to do a crappy job than to do your job right. What the hell? But that's another step of maturity where everything has to go in your change management system. It has to be audited. Everybody has to check it. Then there's a push. Then everybody knows you're using this version. But there's a point of maturity where companies have not figured that out yet. And of course, every time you move forward, your old school people will try to keep to the old way, even though it's no good.
just
and they will try to sneak by and keep doing the old thing. That's a huge issue. Yeah. Anyway, so then there's forensics, where you are looking for evidence to find out what happened. So after there's been a breach or a security policy failure or something bad has happened, now you want to collect evidence off the network and the devices to see what happened. There's anti-forensic techniques to hide evidence, so it's difficult or impossible to recover. I mentioned these before. There are files you can put on servers that will crash forensic tools and so on. In the old days, maybe 15 years ago, it was typical to kick out the plug and just get the hard drive, and the only evidence that mattered was the hard drive. The reason this was true is because the files on the hard drive have an owner and a creation date. So you can tell who did what when. Data in memory does not have an owner or a date. You have no idea how old it is or who put it there, so they said that's useless. But in the modern IR field, you are not just a criminal, you're not just trying to arrest a criminal like the police, you're trying to track down malware and see how far it got. So the evidence you need is in RAM. And even if you cannot attribute it to a time and a date, you still need that. So memory images are now essential for real incident response. Although it is absolutely true that data gathered from memory is probably almost useless from a viewpoint of prosecuting in court, because you cannot, it doesn't have owners or timestamps. So it's very hard to really prove who put it there. But it's usually what you need to analyze what happened in a hack.
So when the FBI breaks down the board, do they leave the system plugged in?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. In fact, this is if the one I've seen these devices. If they suspect that someone is going to like a child porn site, what they will do is they will have a guy dressed up like a UPS driver, and they carry a little meter that measures the amount of wireless traffic, and they let the guy come home, eat dinner, turn on his lights, and they wait until they see him downloading something. Then they have the UPS guy knock on the door. He answers the door. They wrestle him to the ground and go in the room. They have to catch the machine on downloading it right now.
Oh, the act of.
That's how they do it. Then you know you've got him. Otherwise, they'll say somebody else did it, somebody used my wireless network, all that crap.
So I had a grant. We had a guy who was in forensics in Oregon, and he worked for the FBI, but he was on porn, and he got caught.
Yeah.
And so they came to us, and they wanted all the files and what he did with us.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even know this guy. It was so bad because they came in and made images of all the computers that we had.
Yeah.
It was really bad. We met this guy, and he was just like so normal. And he was in jail.
That's what people always say. The neighbors always say, gee, he seemed like such a nice guy, the serial killers and everybody. You really can't tell. Yeah. Anyway, so you decide what systems have the evidence, then you have to acquire the evidence, then you analyze it, and then you prepare a report. These are the steps in forensics. So you have to do a capture. The most important capture for incident response is a live capture, where you capture live memory, live network traffic. That is the most important for networks where people are breaching a network. An image of the hard drive is good for computer police evidence, but usually not that useful for incident response because it's too big. You have gigabytes of stuff to wade through. And so if you take a complete bit-by-bit image of a hard drive, a magnetic hard drive, you can recover all the deleted files. As I mentioned before, not so much for SSDs, but for magnetic hard drives, the deleted files are usually still right there. Right, so disk-based allocated space is normal files. These are files that have a file name and they're in current use. Unallocated space is space between the used files that is available to be reused, and it contains whatever was last on there. Those are previously deleted files or fragments of previously deleted files. Then you have slack space. There's a few bytes at the end of each file that are left over from the previous file in the block, and there's other fragments, and there's bad blocks and sectors on the disk that contain fragments of data that have been left over from the past. So, but typically most of the data is the allocated files that are still in use, or the unallocated files that have recently been deleted. That's mostly what you gain value from. Then there are fragments that might contain a little bit of information, but that's pretty minor in comparison. So you can back up a disk with a Norton Ghost in forensic mode, or with FTK Imager or Ncase or any of a variety of tools. I have a lot of free tools you can use because they, just like people make PDF readers free, but they charge for the PDF writer, they make the acquisition tool free, so you can give it to someone who is not very technical, and they go to the scene and acquire the tool, and then they charge a lot of money for the analysis tool. So FTK Imager is a common free imager that you can put on a thumb drive and take to any scene and make an image of any hard drive anywhere. And that's the kind of thing that's typically done.
What does Norton Ghost do?
Norton Ghost is the early image deployment tool. It would let you take an image of a hard drive and then push it out over the network to deploy that copy of the OS everywhere. And the most common use case, you have one installation of Windows and software, and then you want to fill the room with it. So you make many copies over the network with multicast. But that only does the active data. And you can put a forensic mode where it actually does a complete copy of the entire disk. That's all. It was just an old piece of software that was around before these specialized forensic things. Like, forensics all started, there was no tool at all except Norton Disk Doctor. It would just let you see the contents of the disk in hex. That was the first tool that you'd use, and that was all anybody used. And then after it became a more popular thing, they started developing specialized forensic tools. So Norton was there first.
So would you consider FTK probably, FTK is the only one that is shareware, right?
No, FTK is commercial and expensive. No, FTK, typically these are the two main players. FTK is expensive and it's the standard for the FBI. NCASE is what most police departments use. They're both very similar. They both cost like $50,000 to get a full license. They each have some free products, but the main product that means you can analyze a whole hard drive full of data and quickly find all the emails and images and everything, that costs a pile of money in both cases. Yeah. So there is a free product called SleuthKit, which is the Linux version. SleuthKit, S-L-E, yeah, it's the free version. And just like OpenOffice, it is a pale shadow of the commercial product. If you use it, you will just cry and realize why people pay so much for the pay one, which is true of most free versions. Therefore, and if you're doing cell phones, there's Celebrite and Blackbag, which are the expensive commercial tools you use for that. And they'll buy that and they'll send you like 50 adapters to connect every possible cell phone and suck the data off all the different cell phones. And that's like 10 or 20,000 bucks.
What would you recommend for students? What kind of tools?
For students, when I teach forensics, what I would highly recommend is partnering with one of these companies and if you have some money, I would just get Encase or FTK. Encase will sell you dongles. I had the whole plan to do this. Your instructors get certified in Encase. That's the most valuable one to have in the industry. And you pay them like about 20 grand. You get about 8 or 10 dongles, and you can have a lab like this, and that can be your forensics lab. And they can use the real case. And then they get Encase certified examiner certification, and that will really get them a job. FTK has a certification program too, which is all right, but Encase is the gold standard. And if you're not totally broke, you should just get that. That's my recommendation. However, I have taught forensic many times without that using open source tools like SleuthKit, and you do learn how hard drives work and how forensics work, but it really is a lot harder with the open source tools. And you spend a lot of time doing Linux system administration. Yeah.
They still do have the educational stuff.
They don't really have an educational program or anything. It's pretty rude, but if you contact them, they will give you a moderate discount. They'll get you down to where it's like $2,000 a seat instead of like $50,000 a seat. So they don't have like a Cisco Networking Academy help or anything like that.
The guidance software used
Yeah.
to do Encase before.
They do still guidance software, and they are the standard. And the NCE is the certification everyone expects you to have. So I highly recommend getting it and teaching it. I've been trying to get it at my college for years. I taught forensics for years using open source tools. And then I started teaching incident response instead. And I handed over forensics to another teacher. And I've been trying to get that teacher to get certified and go to a certified class. But our administration is so chaotic that it hasn't proceeded yet.
So, curious. What
Yeah.
are the prerequisites for you're going to teach a
And one of these?
Yeah.
Oh, I think just A+ and Net+ is all you need. Because you just need to know basically how network works and you know about the hard drive and stuff. A+ might be all you need, really.
Because I had a current student last semester. He took my night class.
Yeah.
He's in police. He's in the police department now. He want to do forensics.
Yeah.
And he said it's not that bad. He says.
No, it's not that
You
hard.
take classes to get certified, and you were in the force or you apply. They're actually looking for people in forensics.
Well, yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of money in it.
Yeah.
And it used to be really hard, but these tools make it really easy. These tools are real luxurious. Yeah.
So what I did was I wrote the labs in for using FTK, all the downloads. And whoever's teaching, they can do whatever they want. But just to get the curriculum going through, I recommended FTK, whatever the free downloads was, so
Yeah.
I can put in the labs.
Yeah, but I mean, these are very good. They're both expensive, but they are standard. You can really get a job at these search. And by the way, a lot of cloud providers will do it now. If you go to DiskSaver is a data recovery company where if your machine crashes, they can recover the data, but they now have a criminal forensic arm. They will do forensic images and they will send people to testify in court about them. You can outsource all this now. Police departments outsource it. If they get some exotic device, they just pay disk drive savers to image it for them. Because they have a huge lab with all these connectors and all these components, they can take apart. You can do chip-off SSD forensics, which is almost science fiction. You take the cell phone apart, you take off the chips. It turns out that a stack of SSD memory is a stack of 8 chips, and there's 1 bit on each chip. It's crazy. They take it apart and take the data off the chips one by one, disassembling them and soldering them into another board. That's how they do it. That's the way you really get all the data. And that is pretty exotic stuff, and they will do that for you. So people pay them to do it, and they will do it right and keep records and have somebody that can go to court and testify about it. Of course, that's expensive, but it's cheaper than training your own staff and buying all that junk if you don't have to do too many of them. So there are jobs in it. Yeah. Anyway, so there's network forensics. This is how I got the black badge at DEF CON. I won the network forensics contest, on my team. The other guy earned most of the points, but I was technically on the winning team. And so network forensics is where you look at network traffic for data, evidence of something. And so you the main tool that we use in class is Wireshark. The main tool professionals use is command line tools like TCP dump because they're much faster. But anyway, you can now find out all the file transfers, all the servers people are connecting to, all the things routers and switches are doing. Of course, everything is there on the network traffic. So once you have captured the data, you then analyze the data. If you want to analyze malware, you'll have binary files, typically Windows executables, and there's a whole class of reverse engineering. There's a whole certification in reverse engineering. I teach an exploit development class and a malware analysis class in this, where you take apart executables and figure out how they work. And there's a lot of cool tools to help you in that. It used to be that just like in the days there was nothing but Norton Disk Doctor, there's a time when all you could do was print out the assembly code and read it. Those days are gone. There's now a whole bunch of tools to make it much easier, like IDA Pro and now Ghidra and Ali Debug and a whole bunch of tools like the Encase and FTK designed for this job to make it easier. All right. Yeah, it's very nice. Ghidra is so much, I'm going to have to write a whole bunch of homework because it makes all my old homework too easy.
Those from the NSA is totally cool.
It is fantastic.
Yeah,
Ghidra does not just a disassembler, it's a decompiler. If you run Ghidra on malware, it turns it back into readable C course code. It makes it so easy. I'm going to pretty much ignore IDA completely and just use Ghidra instead. And it supports everything, ARM, 64, everything, whereas IDA blocks all that. It is so much better than IDA. It's going to really hurt IDA's sales, in my opinion. Although IDA, for real pros, you really need IDA with all the advanced stuff. But there's actually a lot of advanced stuff in Ghidra too, which I haven't got to. There's online Ghidra courses stuff. Ghidra is fantastic. Then, like I say, there's a huge issue. You have to get cell phones and iPads and everything. Yeah.
The solid state USBs, the
Yeah.
ones that are with electricity, right?
Yeah.
Is it true that it's very hard to get forensics of that literally if there is electricity? I still
It's
find
not.
that
Well, you have to decide what you want. For example, you can just take a camera and photograph the instant messages on a cell phone. And that's data, that's evidence. The evidence in court is the human testifying. It's not the technology. You have to do something to say I recorded. You could write it down on a pen and say I saw it on the phone, and that's evidence because a human is there to testify. So the question is, what do you want? You can get some of the data by just looking. You can get a lot of the data by just connecting using iTunes or something. If you really want every single bit on it, then it gets hard. But you don't necessarily need that. And that's what these fancy forensic tools do. They really get every single bit off the storage device. And that's the gold standard. But if you're just trying to catch a criminal, you might be content to just get the most recent IMs and nothing else. That might be all you need. So, but of course, if you are a forensic shop, you will try to say, we do the best job, we get 100% of the data, and then you have the money to pay for all these fancy tools. But to get all the data off every cell phone is very difficult because they're all different. And you need all these connectors and all these different software tools. So it's just a question of, of how much you want. Anyway, so all these devices. All right, then there's e-discovery. That's why I tell my students in my forensic class there are 4 jobs this prepares you for. Data recovery for people who accidentally delete data. That's a huge job. Of course, the police gathering evidence to prosecute people if you want to work for law enforcement. Incident response in companies where they want to find out what has happened after a hack or an insider threat. And the last one is e-discovery. These are all huge, exploding fields. E-discovery is because everybody's getting sued all the time. And if you are a big company, you just have an endless flood of lawsuits coming in and a permanent lawyers team protecting you. And therefore, every time you get sued, they will demand the evidence. You will get a discovery order from the court saying you must turn over every document about your relations with this company. So every email, every file, every PDF, everything. And so you have to search through all your networks and backups and everything to find it. So that is the process called e-discovery. And you have to do a good job of it, because if you fail to discover, if you fail to reveal the evidence, the judge can punish you with just a summary judgment against you. And that has happened, and that has destroyed companies completely. So even if your company is disorganized and your backup tapes are lost and scattered all over the place, and you change software versions to where the formats are incompatible, it's your duty to search through all that junk. So people that grow up and become mature, they have permanent indexing software running on their network all the time to index all the emails and index all the files and make sure you know where they are, so you can automatically find it all in response to discovery. And this is why people were so upset about Hillary Clinton's email. She was using an unofficial email server, which means none of that was happening. And it's a legal requirement for the presidential staff to have all that stuff indexed and available so it can be archived. So it really is not okay for you to be using something else for official business that is not in the system of all that stuff. Although her argument is that that was not actually required at the time she did it, and that might be true, but it certainly should be required of any mature company that's ready to deal efficiently with the real consequences of doing business. And anyway, one of my best students works at a big e-discovery company in San Francisco, and it's a really good job. I mean, it's an ever-growing field. It's very close to what I used to do as an escrow agency and settlement administration. I was doing another forensic job, although I didn't know it at that time. I was doing refunds to people who had money stolen from them. And so I was getting these piles of discs and tapes and stuff that they'd take from a network. FTC would kick down the door, seize a bunch of computers, and all backup tapes, make an image of that, and then send it to me. And I was the guy that would gather it together and figure out how to make a database out of it. And that's a forensic job too, close to e-discovery. Anyway, then there's instant response. You have to have a team to handle when you get hacked and when security violations occur. So you have to have preparation to deal with an incident. Then you have identification, so you know what is a security incident and what is not, what is just a normal failure, and then you have containment. The first issue is what is still on fire? Is a virus still spreading? Is a hacker still going through a network stealing even more stuff? How do you stop the fire? Then you try to figure out how to remove all the damage and report what you found, and then recover, get things back to working again. And then you should have a lessons learned afterwards where you say what went wrong this time, what went right this time, how are we going to do better next time? That's the continuous improvement closed loop that you should have everywhere. And then you have reporting, make sure you keep a permanent record of this so later teams can read what happened and make plans. That's a full, mature IR plan. Most companies have no IR team until they get hacked. Then they throw it together and tell their existing administrators to do it. And then they gradually get more and more professional and better at it as they realize that they need to dedicate resources to this. So you write policies and procedures, and you train people, and you have some staff that has the equipment they need and somebody the training they need to gather evidence off your network and your hard drives and everything. And then you'll have a checklist for incident handling, determine whether it's occurred, acquire the evidence, contain it, eradicate it, and so on. There's a step-by-step recommendation here. And so you have to detect whether there really is an incident. There could be a hard drive failure. There could be somebody locked out of an account. There could be some web page become unavailable. And that does not mean you've been hacked. It just means something broke, somebody made a mistake. That's not really a security incident. You have to decide whether you really have a security incident that needs investigation or you have some lesser problem that doesn't. Once you decide you have an incident, then you have to first decide how much harm it is doing and how to limit the harm it does. So you want to take down the servers, tell everyone we're down for a while so nobody can use them so they can't continue to do further harm, or isolate part of the network, or block some of the user accounts, or whatever it is required to stop the fire from spreading. And of course, at this point, you better have management approval because you're going to interrupt real business at this time. This is beginning to really cost you money. So you have to make sure management understands what you're doing and has approved it. Then you got mitigation, where you're going to figure out the cause. This is the most common mistake people make, is they jump to mitigation. This is like I told colleges they've been hacked. I found a bunch of pharmaceutical redirectors at 19 colleges. So their web pages are being redirected to Viagra sales that were Russian websites pretending to be Canadian websites selling illegal drugs. And I told the colleges and nobody cared, because nobody ever cares when you tell them white hatting stuff. They just ignored me. But a few of the, usually Santa Cruz, cared enough, so they just re-imaged the server. So next week they had 4 infected servers. That's all that happens. All the typical system administrator knows how to do is re-image the server. And that is like you see a roach in your house, you step on it. There, the problem is solved. No, that means there's another 1,000 roaches hiding somewhere and you have to find them all. And all you do by stepping on that one is you warn the rest and they go hide. So when you just re-image the one server that you noticed, you didn't notice the 10 other things that have been hacked, and now they know you're onto them, so they dig in deeper and hide more. That's why what Mandiant does when they come in is they will first analyze your network and let the attack proceed for a while they make sure to find it all. And then in one eradication event, they close all of those gateways and kick them out and patch all of those vulnerabilities so they are really gone and they don't come back. And that means you have to be slower to respond and spend more time analyzing before you respond, which is a common theme. You know, the professionals take the time to really understand what they're doing. The amateurs take a hasty, poorly thought out action and end up making it worse. Anyway, so then you have to have reports, of course. You have technical reports going to your technical team, guiding them, and you have non-technical reports going to management and compliance officers and legal and public relations, so they know what they should be telling people about this. And then you have recovery, where you're trying to bring things back to function. You have to add monitoring to make sure that they don't come back, because it's entirely possible, especially when you're new at this, it's very likely that you have in fact not succeeded in finding it all and kicking them all out, and they're just going to come back, and you better be aware of that. And then remediation. You clean up the vulnerabilities, switch to a more secure system, and then have a post-mortem where you consider how this all went and how we can do it better next time. All right. So I got some Kahoots about that, and they will be 8A, I think. If I can get to the right page. Yep, 8A. All right. I got 5. I think 5 may be the number. Anybody still coming? No screams of protest. We shall proceed. Okay, gathering evidence for a lawsuit. What's that? That's e-discovery. They call this discovery. They say you must hand over everything you have. And if you don't, then you're cheating and you're going to be in big trouble. All right, which one is also called compartmentalization? I think it's need to know, yeah. They call it sensitive compartmented information. Where it's sensitive, you must have a certain clearance, and it's also compartmented. You also have to have need to know to see it. Which control requires your personnel to keep secrets. That's the NDA. And by the way, when I teach this class and my students do real security audits, which happens frequently, I make them sign NDAs and live up to them. I say, you might as well get used to this. As part of your job, you're going to have to keep your mouth shut like a doctor does and a lawyer, and you better get used to it. Anyway, all right. So which process would we include writing IR policies? Incident response. That's the preparation phase, of course. You write the policies, then before you do all the work. All right. Which one must include a non-technical explanation? Your reports must include a non-technical part to go to non-technical people like managers, lawyers, your legal team, your compliance team, your public relations team, and the technical staff typically are very resistant to documentation. They hate it, and you have to make them do it. That's another step of maturity. Mature companies actually have good reports you can read. Anyway, which one includes submitting a final report to management? That's the postmortem, and it's all over. The final report includes not only what was about this incident, but what decisions you made to change things to make it better next time, and that requires management approval because that is going to require allocating resources to make those changes. All right, so it's Robert, PC, and Jane, the likely suspects. All right, so we're at 10:13. I think we can do, maybe we should take a break now. Pick up at 10:30. Yeah, let's take a break till 10:30. I'll stop it and break the slides up. All right. We'll resume.